I certainly say, Madam Speaker, and I think Oregonians will agree with me.
Political bodies exist to secure responsible government and to execute the will of
Well, let's get rolling. You guys okay with this?
Yeah, rock and roll.
Yes, sir.
So one of the things we've started to do, the Oregon D.O.G.E podcast, is we're trying to create some segments, trying to get some people with some consistent viewership to get drawn back in. And so Alex Lopez is with us again. He's going to pop up. Let's get our game going. Alex, turn it over to you.
All right, your favorite game, Senator.
Well, I finished last place last time. Just so you know, I'm not sure I scored a point, but let's go.
Okay. All righty, so where does Oregon rank? First question here. In the entire U.S., where does Oregon rank in regards to the state gas tax?
Don't shout them out. Mike McLean liked to write his answer down and reveal it. Let's make sure that you're on the record as to where you think we are before we make it official.
And I will point out in terms of when you're putting out your number, we're going in terms of that, from highest to lowest.
So highest gas tax. Mm-hmm. Okay, I've got my guess. Are you guys ready? I'm going to say that we're 15th highest.
Okay.
I say we're fourth.
Okay.
Well, I wrote down top 5. Does that count?
Top 5. Okay.
Okay, so we are 10th highest. Ugh. So I guess
That does ring a bell now.
that goes to
Closest
Senator
without
Bonham.
going over? Closest
Yeah,
without going over?
I think that goes to Senator
Why are
Bonham.
we even here?
Okay, so the next question we've got is, in the entire U.S., where does Oregon rank in regards to vehicle registration fees?
I feel like I've seen these graphs before.
You guys have? You got it?
Yep.
25th, that's my guess.
38th.
5th.
Okay.
Well, that's a range.
All over the map.
Representative Bossart Davis is right on the money. It's the 3rd highest.
Yeah.
So
The
she's
3rd
right
highest.
there.
And the
It's-
only
my
reason
gosh.
I was thinking this, just the presentation we saw in revenue, I was looking at those numbers and I thought, this is extreme. This is crazy that they're this high.
It's about 137 per vehicle.
But you're not it's apples and oranges. I was thinking about, seriously, because other states you pay a registration fee based on the value of your vehicle, but they don't probably call that a registration fee. They probably call it something else.
God bless you. You sound like me last week.
There you go.
I was explaining every single
Everything.
wrong answer I had.
That's exactly
You
right.
guys are not
Come on
taking
now.
into consideration the current value of money. Okay.
Yeah.
And I do want to point out for the viewers that for the gas tax, it's 40 cents a gallon. That's what we're working with.
40 cents.
Correct.
So, all right, last question. In the entire U.S., where does Oregon rank in regards to the total lane miles in the state?
9th. Oh, sorry. We're supposed to write them down first.
What do we rank?
I shouted total lane miles. Now, is that managed by ODOT or is that all
There's no
roads?
lanes in Alaska, so they're huge.
Right.
But they don't. There's
say
no
all.
roads. Total lane miles of state highway, county roads, city streets.
Yeah.
All
All.
of the above.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
We're pretty big.
I yelled 9th.
I'm going to go with 12.
Okay.
14.
Okay. It is 29th.
Really?
So we're giving that to
I'm not
Senator Starr.
sure that seems.
It's
He's like,
He's even questioning
again,
it when
this
he
is not
wins.
apples to apples.
162,000 miles.
Wow, that's a lot of miles.
We have a lot of the state that doesn't have roads.
I just thought starting with a fun little game.
That's fun.
That was fun compared to what we're
Tons of
about to
fun.
talk
And-
about, because there's a lot of not fun stuff we're about to talk about.
And you're talking to a couple of the members who are, the transportation, quote unquote, nerds.
Nerds.
And maybe we don't know our stuff as well as we think we do.
Well,
We thought we were smarter.
but you
That's
know
unfortunate.
Oregon stuff. You just didn't know how to compare it to the other states.
There you
maybe.
go. Okay.
Okay.
Next.
All righty. So ODOT, by the numbers, just an overall view here, nearly 2,000 regulations and over 1,250 pages of documents.
Could it be that ODOT is doing things that maybe they shouldn't be?
Yeah, I would go with that's probably too much and not doing what we would call core mission.
Core mission.
I'm going to guess that most of those would be not core mission of ODOT. in our opinion.
So
The collective hour.
But let's just dive right into that. So what is the core mission of ODOT?
So I think if you first think of how Oregonians would think of, I mean, we could talk about what they really need to, but if Oregonians are saying what should ODOT do, you're talking about maintaining, building roads and bridges, making sure that they're plowed, making sure that the lines, you can see them. Like that's going to be core mission of ODOT, making sure that you can get from point A to point B safely, right? And I think that that's what Oregonians think.
Okay. Do you agree?
yeah, roads and bridges,
Roads and bridges.
moving freight efficiently.
If we had Governor Kotek or the director of ODOT, would they agree with that definition?
So the director of ODOT would say that he does what the legislature and the governor tells him to do. So that's his answer.
Okay.
But I think if you had the governor here, it would be definitely a different perspective than Representative Bossar Davis myself.
They would, she would, in my opinion, talk about a multimodal approach to Oregon transportation, and any decisions made would be through the lens of climate and equity. And I would say that that is a too broad representation, especially if we can't keep up with core mission. It would be one thing if we could keep up with core mission of ODOT, and our roads are great and our bridges are great, and then we can move on and do other things. But when those core mission pieces of ODOT are not working, and we're saying that they're not working, then we have a problem.
So we're about to transition into this, but I want to just say, to your point about core mission, non-core mission, you have a luxury of non-core mission when you have funds to facilitate.
Yeah.
And right now we're being told by the agency, by the executive branch, we don't have enough money to do the core essential services of maintenance. And we need how much more money?
$352 million to maintain current service level.
300
Just to not get rid of people.
just to not get rid of people.
Just to not get rid of people. Just that. 352 million.
Not to deliver on projects that were promised from 2017, not to deliver on projects that may be necessary to modernize and keep up with demand on our roads.
So that yes and no to that. They would say that 352 million allows them to continue to spend the available resources, and that includes projects, but it doesn't include big projects. But the STIP is full of projects all over the state. Those projects would be funded, provided we give them the 252 million. If we don't, then some projects won't. And the idea that they're proposing is that they would shut down service facilities all over the state. That there would be individuals that are currently plowing roads that would be fired. That striping wouldn't be accomplished. I mean, there's a host of other things. What am I missing, Representative?
Well, and I think that this would also it would disproportionately affect rural Oregon. And so when they say that, you have to think that a lot of those roads that we were talking about earlier, a lot of those are in rural Oregon. A lot of those DMVs that they would talk about either less staffing or shutting down, that's going to affect rural Oregon more than it's going to affect the I-5 corridor. So that's when it starts talking to our constituencies, maybe not ours specifically sitting here, but throughout Oregon. Sure. I think that really affects rural Oregon more. And he mentioned 352 million, which is that main number of restoration, keeping those employees. But the governor's recommended budget is 1.75 billion, which that 352 is inside. So that's plus preservation. You can go down the list, but her recommended budget is $1.75 billion. And if we want to get into the weeds, then we start talking about this 50, 30, 20 split among county and city. So you take that 1.75 and you got to double it. Right. Immediately. So 1.75 is for ODOT. So if you continue that funding mechanism, that's $3.5 billion is her budget.
So let's introduce who we've got here today. We've been telling folks that this day was coming. People have been waiting with great anticipation. Our ODOT
holding their breath
D.O.G.E episode. Representative Shelley Bosshart Davis, Senator Bruce Starr. Briefly, give us your bona fides. Tell people paying attention to this, how you have credibility in this space, because both of you have resumes that are impressive when it comes to transportation.
First thing, I grew up in transportation. I own a trucking company. My dad started that in 1983. I say all the time with 2 trucks and a dream. Built that to over 35 trucks that myself and my business partner, Macy Wessels, purchased from my parents about 7 years ago. We also export grass straw to Japan and Korea for feed for beef and dairy farms. So we're involved in exports, which involves rail, obviously drayage. We still own and operate that trucking company. I've been on the transportation committee for the last 6 years, and also on the I-5 Bridge Committee. So involved in every aspect of it, both in a personal and professional private sector life, and been on the committee watching this for the last, being part of it for the last 4 years.
And although not necessarily transportation, conflated with transportation all the time, also fought the climate fight on the Carbon Reduction Committee.
That was my first year in 2019, along
God
with
bless you.
then Representative Bonham. Those 2 years will go down in history, will be etched forever in our mind, with lots of stories that go along with that. But yes, a kind of a parallel track of the cap and trade fight in 2019 and 20.
Yeah.
As a freshman, and so that was trial by fire.
Great to have you. Bruce?
Yeah, so I'm back in the legislature after a 10-year hiatus. Currently represent Polk and Yamhill counties, and previously served in the legislature for 16 years representing Western Washington County. And in those previous 16 years of service, I was involved in transportation from the time that I walked in the door till really the time that I left. Chaired the House Transportation Committee in 2001 when the legislature passed the OTIA 1 bill, and then all the way through all the OTIA processes, the JTA. Senator Betsy Johnson, myself, and Senator Verger helped to create Connect Oregon, which is funneled money to non-highway freight-specific projects. I've had my hands in transportation policy in a lot of ways during my previous service, and come back in, and holy smokes, we got a transportation problem. So the presiding officer said, "Hey, we'd like your help."
Well,
so
very selfishly, we, Senate Republicans had walked out in 2023. We were losing 6 of our members. 2 of our transportation experts, Brian Boquist, Senator Lynn Finley.
Yep.
And so you're a godsend in the Senate Republican caucus to have somebody with experience come in. I don't normally make people give their bona fides, but you guys are very credible in the space, and I just want the people back home to know that we're not just sitting here with a bunch of paperwork and opinions, but we actually have some experience and expertise in this space. So Alex has been with us before. Everyone knows Alex. Alex, you put some slides together for us. The next thing that really is up is the budget.
Yeah. So, and Representative Buster Davis was talking about the recommended budget. You can see the difference in the top line numbers for the last budget and the upcoming one as well. So.
What's so tough for me looking at this, though, is one of the things that we'll talk about tonight, and there's a later slide I know exists, but we might as well get into it right now. There was a $1.1 billion accounting error. So when you look at a 2023-25 legislative approved budget of $6.3 billion.
Yeah, it was actually 5.3. So, yeah, it's
billion here, a billion there.
Well, and it's not like somebody took $1 billion and put it in their back pocket and walked out the door. It's just money that never existed, and it took them some time to figure out that it didn't exist, and that's a whole nother story. But I'm assuming, I wasn't in the building, but I'm assuming I serve on that committee now, the Ways and Means Committee that oversees their budget, and I can see the director standing out there or sitting in front of the committee and saying, "Yeah, we're going to have, I don't know, $3.5 billion, I think is the number that is represented in the 23-25 for federal funds." But and the legislators sitting behind the dais said, "Okay, we've got a bunch of money coming from the feds. It just wasn't real money."
So somebody sitting at home, how do they reconcile that? So the budget number's off. Mm-hmm. There was a plan to perform a certain amount of services.
Yeah.
There's not $1 billion there. Mm. So is it a cash flow issue or is it a service delivery issue? How is someone sitting at home supposed to account for that massive budget mistake?
More than anything, it was a forecasting error, right? So they forecasted when the money was going to come in, and they front loaded the projects too much. The projects that were going to be built over the next. So it was a forecasting error, and it would be really bad if it wasn't caught. But to Senator Starr's point, when they caught it, they actually caught it the end of 2023. Which is wild. They caught that 2023. The public didn't know about it, and you only know about it if you're watching the OTC meetings. They told OTC about it in May of 2024, which they then, quote unquote, fixed and figured out how to reshuffle projects, push them off to know when the money was coming in. But the Transportation Committee, which what I think is even more unfathomable that it took that long to let us know, is we've been talking for a year plus that we're going to be talking about a transportation package, right? You got to put all the cards on the table. We didn't know about it until a slide that was thrown up in front of us in a meeting, and that was a couple weeks ago. Right. And that was the first time that we had heard about it. And I think that just shows a lot when you talk about transparency or being accountable. We'll talk about that a lot, I'm sure, tonight. That was a pretty big problem. In fact, my first thought was, where's the email? I'm sure I'm forgetting that I was told this, because you don't just throw that in front of us, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
It was wild.
Did anybody in leadership have an explanation, or did they suggest that they knew about it the whole time?
No,
No.
they did not. You mean leadership, meaning the majority party?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say that, and I won't out the person, but high up in the hall said, "When did you know about this?" And I said, "I found out on Monday."
Yeah.
Shocking.
There was a reference to it in the Statesman Journal article. So, but it wasn't. There was so much in that Statesman Journal article that you could have read it and not really seen it. But it was referenced in that article that, to a large extent, is what's precipitated, a big conversation about accountability.
So one of the challenges, these massive numbers, right? So I remember this interim, Director Strickler and ODOT coming into my office and talking about $3.5 billion, right, that they needed to raise to bridge the gap. That then became 1.75, and I said, how did you cut that in half? Like, now I'm skeptical about every number, including the 6.3. Apparently rightfully so. But your answer, which is the right answer, is that only considers ODOT's allocation of a funding mechanism that historically has been split 50% to the state, 30% to counties, and 20% to cities. And so 1.75 is a sneaky way of saying we still need 3.5.
In theory.
In theory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're not fooling anybody.
Right.
So.
It's a smaller number. But I think that one thing that kind of we should be talking about every time we talk about this budget or this money, these are funds that are different than other agencies, right? ODOT's main part of their budget, the majority of it, comes from the Highway Trust Fund, comes from outside sources. It doesn't come from the general fund. So every time we talk about $3.5 billion or $1.75 billion, this is new revenue. And revenue is maybe a nicer way of saying taxes, right? This is, we say this, raising revenue, but we're talking about raising taxes on Oregonians, plain and simple. So when we say 1.75 billion or 3.5 billion, it's more taxes. It's not existing taxes. We're not changing the existing tax or all the revenue streams. In 2017, there were 7 different revenue streams from that package, which I'm sure we'll get to. But we're talking about raising revenue. So I want to make sure everybody listening that knows that we're talking about more taxes. And I think that we're extremely not just sensitive, but we understand that Oregonians, their number one problem in this state is cost of living. That's it. And so we have to think, before we talk about doing any of this stuff, we have got to acknowledge that that's raising taxes on Oregonians.
So even when you hear these numbers, though, whether it's 1.7, whatever the number is, to the point of the misallocation in the budget, the misforecasting, I guess, is the better way of saying that. Mm-hmm. Every time we don't get a project done today, the project becomes more expensive. Mm-hmm. So $1 spent today is $1.20 tomorrow, is $1.50 a year. You know what I mean? And so I guess my question is, as we transition to a conversation about projects that were promised in 2017 and a framework around taxation, 10% or 10-cent fuel tax, 1% employment tax to
Payroll tax.
fund transit, all those things. And it was a massive negotiation. This was not done overnight. It started in 2015. We had a statewide tour, so to speak, where we went out and we said, hey, we need $3 billion. And up on the board, we threw hexagons that said road use charge, tolling, fuel tax, registration fees. And we didn't tell anybody what we were actually talking about, right? We said $3.5 billion. Here are the different mechanisms that we could use to fund it. But if it took 2 years in 2015 to get 10 cents and 1% and the things that we allocated then, and the numbers we're talking about now, which I know we don't have a slide for this, but it is significant what was presented to you just this week on Tuesday in a report of what they could put forward. These numbers are staggering at a minimum. And again, they're different.
At the end of the day, it's going to be legislators and not, the representative from legislative revenue that decides, how we ultimately solve this problem. And my hope, as it has been done historically and how it was done in House Bill 2017, Republicans and Democrats said, we got a problem to solve. Let's figure out how to solve it. And the information that Mazen provided is interesting, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's the direction that ultimately the legislature is going to decide to go, and certainly not the direction that Rep. Bossart Davis and myself are interested in going. So
I want to return to something you said at the beginning of the podcast, though, when I said, what's core function? What's the governor's vision? If we put those two juxtaposed against each other and sent them out to the people, I feel like we've got a 90-10 issue here, right? 90% of voters are going to say, do this.
Yeah.
10% might say, this stuff's great, and I'm willing to pay for it. Of the 90%, there may be a few that says, that stuff's great, but I'm not paying for it, right? That's what we've seen time and time again, whether it was...
Until we get this done first.
Until we get this done
Right?
first.
If we get this done first and let's do it well, and then we'll talk about this 10% over here. And so I truly 100% believe that that's the case, that we have Oregonians with us. It's a 90-10, 80-20 issue. They talk about that nationally all the time. It's an 80-20 issue. And don't be on the wrong side of an 80-20 issue. We've got to make sure that we get our core mission, our core function done. But you talked about what the projects that we don't do now are going to cost more in the future. And I just want to, what popped into my head immediately is, if we're okay talking about Abernathy for a second. So Abernathy is I-205. That's the big bridge project there that I'm sure most people have seen, and especially those in that area have had to deal with for a long time. That bridge project originally cost $248 million.
Right.
That's on their list. That's what it cost. It is currently estimated to cost $812 million. It's a 300% increase. This is wild. And so when you talk about future projects, them having to take that much money and do that project now means there's a whole list of projects that get pushed off that are going to cost more later.
Right.
So it was interesting when they came and talked about Abernathy in front of our committee. They also sent up an employee, a person that had been in that position for a month, and sent him in front of us.
Yeah.
That's going to just nail him, of course. I mean, you didn't even put up the fact their original cost was 200 some million. All you did was put up 800. So you're not even, again, putting the cards out on the table. But what was interesting when he started talking about it is he kind of proudly said, this is the largest project ODOT has managed in 45 years. And we would say, this is a failure.
Right.
Of project management, of project delivery, and yet you're somehow touting it as the largest project that ODOT has managed, and that's a problem.
Is there an explanation of cost drivers when they come and they present? They say it went from 270 to 800 million.
Yeah, I mean, on that project specifically, the scoping was not done well, to put it nicely.
But was it local people coming and saying,
No,
since you're here?
no, maybe
Maybe a little bit
maybe a
on-
little bit on that. But on that project specifically, the engineering wasn't done, the scoping wasn't done properly. When they got into the ground, they realized that, oh my gosh, we're going to have to go way deeper into the ground with these piers than we thought we were because they didn't do the engineering correctly. And then they recognized, oh my gosh, the girders need additional support in order to survive that massive earthquake that we're all going to see at some point in the next 300 years. So,
But you run a private business. If you had a project that you hired engineers to come in and say, what do I need to do? I mean, there would be a provision in there that created some accountability. Is there any mechanism that the state has with?
So I mean, yes, they can craft agreements depending on whose ultimately stamp is on the piece of paper. Is the stamp on the piece of paper from a ODOT engineer, or is the stamp on the piece of paper from a private sector engineer,
A consultant.
That makes a difference on who's carrying the risk.
Right.
And in this particular case, guess who's carrying the risk?
ODOT.
The public.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you're not going to sue yourself.
Well, and that's the case, right? It doesn't matter if it's a 300% increase, they find the money, right? It's taxes. Oregonians pay for that. And I want to make sure that people understand with that one, this $800+ million, no extra lanes, no increased capacity. This was not that. That's
this was
phase
the original
2.
design of the bridge.
Yes. And so that we're talking only phase 1. There is a phase 2 that increases capacity with zero funding, and the $800+ million does not get to that phase.
Yikes.
Wild.
So the numbers, though, I know you're dismissing them.
Which
as
numbers?
Mazen's numbers.
Oh, yeah.
But at the very least, like the lowest number of just straight gas tax he would have is 20 cents. And it doesn't address getting the numbers you need. It doesn't address HCAS, the highway cost allocation study.
Well, just to get us to balance with cost responsibility, the vehicles, light vehicles, gas tax need to go up 9 cents, and you got to cut the weight mile tax that heavy trucks pay by 30%, 32%,
32.
in order to get to equity. Basically, that each payer is paying their fair share, and that doesn't raise a single dollar for new expenditures.
That's just to fix it.
And why does that matter?
So that matters because cost allocation, HCAS or cost responsibility, at the very least is paying your fair share for the roads. And so there's a whole long algorithm or mathematical equation to say the trucks need to pay this much and the cars need to pay this much to stay in equity with one another.
As mandated.
As mandated by the Oregon Constitution. And we have found over the last 4 years that we are out. The truckers are basically paying too much by 32%. Actually, this next biennia, they're overpaying by 37%. And so over the course of the last, I think it's 4 biennia, 3, and then this biennia, not years, they have overpaid to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars a year. So it is, they're overpaying their fair share. It's outside the Constitution, and just what Senator Starr was just talking about was just to get us back in balance. Does not raise any more money. To raise the gas tax by 9 cents, to decrease weight mile is revenue neutral. And so we've been running outside the Constitution since we've known about it for at least 2 years, and made concerted efforts, including trying to even pull ourselves into special session.
Right.
We even tried to do that. We've ran bills. Senator Boquist, you mentioned him before. He ran a bill. I ran a bill. We've tried to do multiple things in order to get this balanced, and there is no appetite for it.
And we've known we're out of balance.
Yes.
And we continue to press forward.
Yes.
Exacerbating the issue.
Well, it's caused the Oregon Trucking Associations to sue the state of Oregon because they've overpaid by at least $500 million, at least.
And every day we don't fix it,
they're paying more.
They're paying more. And the number one reason is the state wants the revenue. Otherwise, we just decrease the taxes in order to be within equity of cars. But then the state would lose out on hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and they don't want to do that.
Well, and those hundreds of millions translate to projects, and
Correct.
That's the dilemma that we're faced with.
So before we move on, just real quick, just a brief recap. You guys, I think it was in the third meeting, ODOT came in and they presented on the 2017 projects.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave you kind of a where we're at with those projects. And I don't serve on the committee, so forgive me, but I'm going to ask you this question. I kind of walked through and I was looking at some very specific ones. There was a pedestrian safety road improvement in the city of Prineville where it says dedicated funding in 2017, $3 million. Final total cost, $11.7 million.
Yeah.
Does that
We
mean
see it a lot.
So
does that mean that they missed their?
So I will tell you that having been, I wasn't in the room in 2017 when that bill was put together, but what I will tell you is legislators put that number in there based on information that they got from the Department of Transportation or the local government whose idea it was. And to a large extent, it's dangerous to do that because the project has likely not been properly scoped. And so that's part of the reason why, dollars that are in the bill don't necessarily equate to what the ultimate cost is. But what we talked about earlier, it's possible too that the scope of the project expanded beyond what was originally identified.
Well, and I think that we also need to recognize that we've lived since 2017. We've lived through a time that we, first of all, a pandemic. So that obviously affected projects in general, just with timing. We lived through a massive inflationary time. So the cost of these projects obviously went up. Wages have gone up. Like all of these things have gone up. And so that is definitely part of the problem. But can you imagine being, and Senator Starr knows that I'm no ODOT cheerleader. That is not my job. My job is to oversee the agency, right? But can you imagine putting this package together and throwing these projects at ODOT and saying, how much is that going to cost? How much is that going to cost? I need it by 4. Right. So, and I'm sure it wasn't that. I'm oversimplifying it, but
not by much.
But probably not by much. But they have this whole in order to do this responsibly, some of these projects take a long time to figure out what it's going to cost. So, to Senator Starr's point, that would be rough. But to your point, you see that if you go down the list of projects, it's almost all of them have increased in price. And so that affects what we budgeted for these projects.
Well, that's why I just didn't want people to think, oh, Abernathy Bridge, they got one wrong. No, they got US 97 Cooley Road midterm improvements, $50 million turned into 191.5. Tom McCall Road roundabout went from 1 million to 4.8 million. Highway 20 freight mobility enhancement went from 10 to 17.9. Highway 58, I can go on and on, 7.2 became 18. $20 million roundabout in Terrebonne that, for various and sundry reasons has never even happened and is currently estimated at over $39 million, forcing local jurisdictions, Deschutes County and Jefferson County, to come up with the money to backfill to make the project happen.
It's a problem.
So there's
it's a problem.
There's a reason why in 2001, when I, had the privilege of chairing a transportation committee, and we put a package together that the ODOT director at the time, Bruce Warner, came into my office and I told him, I said, I need an overpass in Washington County. We've got an at-grade interchange and people are dying. And he said, that's terrible. He said, I'll check in on it. And I said, if we're gonna do a package, I want that project in the bill. And he says, we don't put projects in legislation. And I said, we don't. And he said, nope, we don't. And so in that package, we didn't. Every time since then we have, because legislators want to know what they're buying.
Right.
And so that's the dilemma that we have as we try to, in legislation say we want these projects built, and we try to guesstimate, and to a large extent the department, because they may not have these projects totally scoped, are giving us a guesstimate, and then ultimately those guesstimates are wrong.
But I do know whatever the numbers will be in terms of what the tax burden, whether it's a road use charge or an increase in fuel, the registration, whatever it's going to be significant. It's going to be impactful if we were to get to where ODOT and the governor want us to be. Now that's a caveat that I'll leave hanging, but those numbers would be significant. And you're asking people that were here in 2017. Senator McLean is back now in the Senate versus in the House, and he said, "Oh my gosh, for what they promised me for 10 cents in 2017, and none of it's been delivered. They better have a different plan this time around." You got something to say?
Well, I would just say none of it, but some of it hasn't been delivered. I mean, but I don't disagree with Senator McLean.
Fair enough.
So
Okay.
There are problems there for sure.
Let's bring Alex back in. Alex, jump to our next slide.
So some fun facts about ODOT's relationship with bikes. When you think
boy.
of Portland, you think of bikes. I'm always dodging them whenever I'm driving out there, right? So almost 40% of Oregonians in a recent survey say they bicycle less, according to research published by the Oregon Values and Beliefs Center. The Oregon Department of Transportation has spent an average of about $8.7 million annually since 1985 in regards to bicycles, bike lanes, things like that. In addition, I'm just going to start saying ODOT, but Oregon Transportation Commission approved $55 million in strategic pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure improvements in the 2024 to 2027 statewide transportation improvement program. And this fun fact is pretty, it's absolutely insane. So with today's funding, it would take 150 years to complete the bike and walking system along with ODOT's roadway. So we talk about not finishing things. And
So you skipped over a bullet point there that I think is really critically important.
Yeah, so I just wanted to get to the fun fact so bad. But there's under Oregon law, it requires that walkways and bikeways are provided when roads are constructed or reconstructed, and mandates that at least 1% of the state highway fund is used for walking and biking facilities.
So here's the fun fact: who wrote that statute, and when was it adopted by the Oregon legislature?
Ooh, this should have been a question at the beginning. I don't know this.
Yeah, I don't know.
Was it you?
It was not. No, it predated me. It was Oregon's youngest ever elected state representative.
Greg Smith.
By the name of Earl Blumenauer in 1970.
Oh,
that
of
makes
course
sense.
it is.
Oh, that
Bike-
makes sense.
the
We
bike
should have
pin.
known that.
19 Sorry, Greg.
1973. 1973.
Greg was young.
He wasn't that young.
Oh my gosh, he was a kid.
1973. Well,
We were
and
all kids then.
so to the point though, it says at least 1%.
So
Arguably, well, not arguably, they are spending more than that. They don't have to. It's at least 1%.
yeah, it mandates 1%, and that was the statute that Blumenauer got in the statute back when he was state representative as a very young Portland legislator, and he never stopped advocating for bikes for the last 50 years.
Yeah, correct.
He
Nice
did,
fun fact.
He did call me a few months ago and said, "Hey, if I can be helpful, because I represent his old district," and he's still advocating.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
still out there.
Nope, for sure.
So, Alex, how do you get on and off of a sidewalk if you're bicycling?
So I know where you're going, but before we go there, can we just? He
Absolutely.
mentions up here the commission $55 million. The number that's in front of me is actually more than that. For the 24, I guess for the 24-27 biennium, I show 70 million.
I show 70.5. So
Yeah,
yep, that's where-
$70.5 million
Yeah.
for bikes and ped.
Even worse, just keeps going open up.
And folks, we live in Oregon.
Yeah.
It rains
It rains a lot. And I think that this point is really the perfect point when we talk about what do Oregonians want when they're spending their tax dollars. I just truly don't believe that this is what they are thinking of. Like, I really believe like you would be surprised if you knew this is how much is being spent on X or on DEI or on climate or on bike ped, right? And so you just go down the list and we continue to talk about these problems, and these problems exist because budgets reflect priorities. And when your priorities are, go down the list, bike ped, DEI, climate, I've got lists
Yeah.
of these.
We'll get into that for sure.
If that's the priorities, then of course it's taking all this money away. And then you start getting headlines like ODOT's annual road condition report card finds lowest percentage of, quote, good pavement since 2001. Well, that's because you're spending the money on not pavement.
Right.
If you're spending your money on pavement, you're going to have a good report card. And then you see what money you have left. But that's not what they're doing. We're spending it on this in lieu of good pavement. We got to get that report card up, period. And everything else needs to be paused or cut or something until we fix that problem.
And I will say, some Oregonians may want this stuff, but right now in today's budget, and part of the reason why we started these D.O.G.E episodes to talk about budgets and to be transparent with voters is we're at a time of need.
Correct.
We're not so flush with cash that we can do whatever we want. So we really are trying to figure out what is government supposed to do in these different sectors. And with ODOT, I think you're right. Like some of these things they may want, but they would certainly say they need the road first and foremost.
All righty. So
Let's go to this. Yep.
the next thing that I want to highlight with this is that the financial impact of AOCIL v ODOT is, it's costed Oregonians about $1.7 billion. So, you mentioned putting the money into pavement, putting the money into these things that we need. Well, we're ending up with situations like this that are costing taxpayers and Oregonians billions of dollars.
So you say AOCIL, and we call it ADA, the ADA or settlement or curb cuts to nowhere. we say
cuts to
that
nowhere.
curb cuts to nowhere often. And this is, when you say $1.7 billion, I believe that there is also another $1.1 billion to be spent on this through 2030.
It's a great point.
That's wild. That's what's been spent so far, and we still have that much more to spend. And that is taking money away from other things. Now, this is a settlement that our Attorney General made, and we've dug into it along with colleague on the House side, Representative Mannix, with his lawyer mind. He loves this stuff. Man, he'll just dig into it like nobody's business. And there's some questions on that. First of all, why did we settle it the way that we did? Inside that settlement, it says ideas like must create these curb ramps when you're building projects in the area. Like do it while you're already doing it. And we feel like it's really expanded. And so we certainly have some questions as to how this was done, whether we can renegotiate possibly and extend that and open up some funding for some, like we go back to core mission.
Yeah.
So show the next photo. real
Yeah,
quick,
so-
since she used the words.
And I want to let Representative Boshart Davis explain this because she lives right over there.
Which I think this is hilarious. They actually brought up this slide and I had nothing to do with it, but I said, are you kidding? That's in tangent. So that's 7 Mile Lane going north and south, and east and west is Highway 34. And they put in a stoplight there a few years back, and you have 4 sets of curb cuts there, which is basically sidewalk. And all 4 corners of that is grass seed fields. Like you're a quarter mile east of I-5 is what we're looking at right there. And between I-5 all the way into Lebanon is just grass seed fields. That's it. And so there is no way, there won't be a sidewalk that links that to the nearest gas station a quarter mile west of that for 120 years.
So what you're saying is we're paying for sidewalks that lead to nowhere.
They literally lead to nowhere. You're looking at that. I drive through there. There's more farm equipment on that road than there is anybody in need of a curb cut.
But even in some towns, like we've got a house in Metolius. My daughter lives down there, and we watched crews of 8 to 12 people. Like I'm sorry, I poured concrete. For the scope of the project, we did not need 8 to 12 guys on a corner helping pour this sidewalk, ramp, curb extension. Then to find out 2 weeks later, as you're watching the same guys with rotor hammers plow it back out.
Talk about it. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, part of the agreement, part of the settlement was, and it's federal code that these ADA ramps, can't even speak. They are
The tolerance.
that's the word. The tolerance is infinitesimal. I mean, they are ridiculous, but it is in federal law, and every one of these finished curb cuts and ADA ramps are inspected by an inspector, and if they are more than 1/8 of an inch off, they have to be torn out and redone. And that is federal law. That's one of the reasons why the cost of this whole program has gone up, because the contractors have recognized that about 1/3 of the work they have to do, or the work they do, they'll ultimately have to redo it.
Yeah.
So it's elevated the bids, and that's one of the reasons why I was told when they signed this deal, they thought, and it was Matt Garrett at the time, believed that they could do all of this work for about $400 million. And that was under previous federal regulation, federal standards. And I was told, I wasn't here, but that shortly after, or almost at the same time they were signing this agreement, the feds changed the standards and elevated them. And ultimately this thing, it's blown up as it relates to cost. And Rep. Bossart Davis is correct that we're looking at the agreement as a way to push it the timeline out. There's some caution about renegotiation or reopening the agreement. Other states are dealing with this. Other municipalities around the country are dealing with this. It's one of those things that if we can find a way to save some resources. I happen to believe that this should not be part of the highway fund anyway.
Amen.
At all. It ought to be funded by general fund, because I'm sorry, you do not drive on the curb.
No.
And it really affects local communities and pedestrians, except when it's out in the middle of a grass seed field.
Well, and the AG is the one that settled that. So why isn't that a state problem? Why isn't that a general fund? The problem with this is a lot of this was funded with Garvey bonds that we could have used for other things. That's the whole problem, is using this took up that capacity that we could have spent that money elsewhere. Preservation, bridges, maintenance, roads. And so that's the problem.
Yeah, operations and maintenance are a big need.
Another aside, we won't go there tonight, but that insurance fund that we have to cover our settlements from litigation, we spend about $10 million a month. We'll be insolvent by the end of the year. We'll talk about that on another episode that's not necessarily transportation related, but
There is a link, though.
Yeah.
When you talk about that, when you talk about ODOT employees that live out of state that have to be their workers' comp or whatever has to be paid for in all of these other states, it's linked to that because you're overpaying for some of this. Just choose up the budget, and that's our problem.
perfect. Alex, you ready for the next?
Yeah, next segment.
Next segment. Did you hear that? We got segments.
Wow.
Got segments. Segments.
Professional.
Okay. So, reality check time. The viewers know this is when we bring up a current bill in either the House or the Senate, and we highlight it as it pertains to the agency or as it pertains to the topic. So, this is Senate Bill 715, and it establishes the Cascadia High-Speed Rail Task Force, outlines membership, mission, and duties for the task force, including recommending legislation to legislative committees related to transportation, and designates Metro as staff for the task force, and sunsets January 2nd of 2029 and takes effect on the 91st day following adjournment and sign and die. So the meat of it is it appropriates $10 million from the general fund to Metro to carry out provisions of the measure. So I'll have you speak to Metro, and
It goes to Metro?
yeah.
That's lovely.
Why not?
So high-speed rail. Mm-hmm. And
Well-
high-speed rail in this region is how fast, Representative?
I mean, I would say it's absolutely ridiculous. But I mean, Cascadia High Speed Rail Task Force, and they want $10 million?
Yes.
We heard this in the
Correct.
committee, didn't we? Just last week. But is this comparable at all? Like, can we compare this to California and their high speed rail? What is it? Boondoggle? Yeah, California High-Speed Rail. So here's a quick brief. The California High-Speed Rail project was originally estimated at $33 billion in 2008 with a completion date of 2020. Legislators demanded an audit to investigate where the $17 billion had gone. Can you imagine? No clear timeline exists for completion. Project is obviously behind schedule. The fate of the project remains uncertain.
It's ridiculous. But the point that I'd like to make is this isn't really high-speed rail. It's slightly faster than current rail. They call it high-speed rail.
Because slightly faster rail doesn't sell.
Well, I've actually been on a high-speed rail in Asia on a maglev train that does go about 300 miles an hour and is quite amazing. That's not this.
Yeah.
I've been on the Shinkansen in Japan many, many times. Been to Japan 13 times.
Yep.
And I ride it every single time. They've got an incredible system. The Willamette Valley is not Japan.
No.
It's not.
Well, and again, California, going back to your point, if they don't get $7 billion infusion, I mean, how much money have they dumped into it? And it does get to that point where you're saying, well, man, should I spend the next dollar and get closer to an end product? Or, like, at what point do I cut bait?
There are, I mean, this is a time to cut bait on this idea. I mean, this is not Elon Musk's
Boring.
loop. What is it in
Tesla?
It's the loop
Is boring.
in
Las Vegas?
Vegas. Yeah, he's
it's
got
the Tesla loop
It's underground though. So
with the Boring Company.
that's not this either.
Or Brightline in Florida, a private company
Mm-hmm.
coming in saying, hey, we'll bring $8 billion to the table and we'll build this. And here's the things.
where
that
there's
we-"
actually population that makes it maybe pencil.
And
Yeah.
Need.
Yeah.
Well, they're talking to the Brightline, I think, is talking to New Mexico right now about Santa Fe, Albuquerque connection. But again, a private company coming in with a private plan, that is not this.
No.
Nope. More money to Metro.
It just shocks me. I didn't know that. How come I missed the whole Metro
I
connection?
missed that too.
That even makes it even sweeter.
Next, we've got what D.O.G.E is all about. Okay, so we've looked into the numbers. I do want to give a shout out to Ben Schmoller, who's a fellow D.O.G.E bro who was supposed to sit in his chair
Fellow
tonight,
Doge bro.
but he can't make it. He had to go back over the mountain. So, but this is ODOT's social equity and civil rights budget. And it's about $29 or almost $30 million budgeted out for the current service level. So why does ODOT have a social equity and civil rights budget?
Well, I want to stand up what Senator Bossart Davis said earlier about what she believes ODOT should be and maybe what others hope it would be. And I'm curious which category this fits into.
Not core mission. Well, I also say, when we're talking about this particular looking at it, if we look at the whole enterprise of Oregon, the enterprise system, all agencies, the executive branch, we have a DAS. We have a Department of Administrative Services. If there's anything important regarding HR related, why do we have a money in the different agencies? Because we're looking at ODOT's, but I'm sure that all the other agencies have this too. Why is this not in HR and DAS?
So you serve on Ways and Means.
Yep.
Every budget that you've looked at has a social equity a budget item or department. And how long have those line items been in those budgets?
So that I don't know. I really don't.
Well, I would suggest that you look at an executive order that the former governor wrote. I would guess around 2018, maybe. I don't know for sure. I wasn't in the building, but I think that was the beginning of all of this spending. And every budget that I said that comes in front of me, it's in there as well.
Yeah.
It talks about it at the end. But when I'm talking about, look at that state highway funds, right? State highway funds.
Yep.
State highway funds need to be used on the highway, and they're taking this directly.
52%, it says.
And then the next line, another 33%.
33.
And they're taking that from the state highway funds. When we go back to that, that's $30 million that can be plowing roads. It can be preserving bridges. It can be doing, again, I know I'm a broken record, core mission of ODOT. and you continue to tear away this, and all of a sudden you're left in 2025, and they're saying we don't have money. Well, we don't have money because you're spending money on this. I mean, that's the bottom line. It's budgets reflect priorities, and that's the budget.
Yep.
It's maddening.
Yeah.
So we got a couple more slides, but honestly, the thing that I keep thinking maddening, right? There's a bunch of this stuff that just it kills me. One of the first hearings you guys had, we talked. I think it was the first hearing. We talked about advanced clean trucks. We had two presenters that were just phenomenal, back to back.
Jordan Pape and Sean Waters.
From Daimler.
Freightliner and Kenworth.
Yeah. And they came in and they just systematically and surgically said, here are the reasons why this just absolutely cannot happen. Do we have any good news on this topic?
We'll say the first good news. There's a bill out there, House Bill 3119. It's my bill. It delays this clean truck rules by 2 years. And just in a real quick, the clean trucks is part of CARB, California's Air Resource Board, that mandates a certain percentage of electric vehicles. So we're talking about trucks and heavy duty tractor trucks. It mandates a certain amount starting with 7% this year and goes up to like 30% depending on the different class of truck, that you have to sell EVs before you sell any diesel powered trucks in the state. That's a huge problem, especially when you're talking about Class 8 tractor trucks. So House Bill 3119 delays that by 2 years. So the good news is that bill is still alive. It's made it through the deadline. That bill is still alive. And the also good news is there's multiple Democrats that are not just supportive of the idea, they're actually on the bill. And right now we'll call it a political process. This isn't rooted in reality. This is not logical. This is political at this point. And even this morning, there was an email that went out again from, I believe, Climate Solutions, and I think the title was Gasp. This bill is still alive. It literally said gasp, like it wrote out gasp. I don't understand. But this is not a reality problem. These don't work. In fact, I believe in the state of Oregon, there are 12 Class 8 tractor trucks that are electric that are running in the entire state of Oregon. Wow. 12.
Well, what was the example that was put forward? It was Daimler said, hey, we had a plot of land. We had 2 acres. We had $2 million. We had a partner in PGE that had load capacity, right? You got to have the energy capacity to deliver to the charging station to put into the truck to begin with. And it took them 2 years to complete. And he said, if you're going to put forward advanced clean trucks and expect there to be the infrastructure necessary for the equivalent trucks on the road that exist today, you need to build 55 of these a week for the next year.
In order to, and think of the land use that you would need and the power capacity. A couple statistics that go along with that. They have one supercharger in the city of Portland that you're talking about, and its uptime is about 50% because thieves keep stealing the wiring. Yeah. So it doesn't even work 100% of the time. That's just one of them. So you think that would be happening all across the state. But also, if you just talked about 100 electric trucks, okay, the heavy duty electric trucks, the same power needed to charge those trucks equals all the houses in Eugene.
Right.
Makes no sense.
Makes no sense. I mean, infrastructure, we can talk about range, we can talk about cost. They cost about 2 times what a diesel-powered trucks cost. They don't have the range that they do. You can't haul more than 80,000 pounds. And in this state, we can haul up to 105.5. So most capacities can't even use this. It's not rooted in reality. It does not make sense. It needs to be delayed. And it is still alive. And I will say that is positive news.
But Jordan put forward, in that presentation as well, to get the same load capacity, you need 2 trucks. So you need 2 drivers, right? So everything they laid out, I watched the entire hearing and I thought, oh my gosh, by the time they were done, I thought, this thing's dead. The governor saw this and she's going to, say, oh my gosh, reality is this can't move forward.
Slapping them in the face.
Right?
Right.
What would you honestly?
It's a no-brainer.
So Bruce Starr's governor, you had put forward this terrible idea, and you watched that hearing. Like the next day, you're
like, let's undo what we tried to do. Yeah, it would be automatic.
Wouldn't you also think this is embarrassing that I'm standing behind this? Obviously, that doesn't work. And the God's honest truth is that there is a environmental community in this state that has too much power. And that is the only reason that it is not moving forward. And that's really shows the case for some of the problems in Oregon. But that's the problem that we have in front of us.
All of that to say that elections have consequences.
Elections have consequences.
It's true.
So, there's no doubt. We need to change the leadership in this state.
3119 is so reasonable. It is a 2-year pause.
That's it. Just delay it, and we'll see if we can build the capacity.
We're not arguing climate change. We're just saying this program clearly doesn't work.
Is not viable.
Clearly.
The technology is not there. The investment's not there. In fairness, and I know it's your bill, and you were trying to be reasonable with it, but if I drafted it, I would have said this needs a 10-year pause. Like that, that would be the closest thing to reasonable to give the technology enough time to catch up to where we are. And I'm not sure 10 years will be enough.
Well, it's not. You look at previous legislatures basically saying we're going to outlaw internal combustion engines by 2035.
Which is where the governor
So
still
that's 10 years from now.
got that a priority.
And
Not going to happen.
how is the grid set up to accomplish that? How is our, how many nuclear power plants are we going to build in the next decade in order to fund that? In order to power all these vehicles? It's just ridiculous.
Well, we got activists out on the Tesla lots exacerbating the problem.
That is true. It's true. Well, just to think of this, it's not even just your tractor trucks that are going down the highway. Think of your tow trucks,
Right.
your cement mixers, your utility bucket
Fire
trucks,
trucks,
your fire trucks.
right, yeah.
Like you think of these are all built on trucks and chassis, right? They're all
a
a
good point.
heavy duty truck with a chassis that is then upfitted to spec, whatever that is. Fire truck, dump truck, you name it, utility truck. Thank you for the graphic. That's a good graphic.
Well, I'll send this to Jacob. We'll get this up on the
You
screen.
guys want to hear, though, can I just say just a
Please.
huge amount of irony? If you think of a Class 8 truck, okay, there is a difference only through CARB and DEQ between a quote-unquote rigid truck and a tractor truck. So a tractor truck has a fifth wheel that then hauls trailers, okay? But a Class 8 truck that is upfitted to something, think it's a cement mixer, it's the same truck. It's the same engine. It's the same. But in CARB, we treat the tractor truck differently than we treat the rigid truck. Why? Because they have no idea.
They don't know what they're talking
They
about.
don't know what they're talking about.
It's a good point.
Again, it's maddening.
What's happening at the same time with diesel technology?
It's the cleanest out there, and that's another big irony, is preventing the cleanest, most efficient, most fuel efficient, clean diesel truck on the road from being purchased.
Yeah.
So you're holding on to older engines longer because you simply cannot purchase a brand new truck in this state right now, and that is the irony of it all, because you're preventing sales from the cleanest diesel out there.
Maddening.
Maddening.
Yeah, I believe it was the OTIA 3 bill that was passed in 2005 where we created a tax credit for trucks to get to buy the clean diesel.
Yeah. If you want to help, just upgrade trucks.
Yep.
Yeah.
So one other thing, we're picking on the governor's executive order on advanced clean trucks. She had an executive order that was going to drive project labor agreements, forcing 80% of the contracting entities in the state of Oregon out of the market, forced into utilizing union shops. Any good news there?
Well, the good news is that the contractor sued, and that we've got a court that basically said we're going to put a pause on this, and they stayed the executive order so that ultimately they can argue their case in court. So that's a good thing. That PLA, if it were to be enacted, what we know based on experience is that costs are going to go up at least 20%, and projects are going to take a lot longer. We know that because the phase 2A Newburgh-Dundee bypass situation, where we had a project that demanded a PLA. It was part of the negotiation in the legislature. That project took an additional year in order to negotiate the PLA. When the bids were let, there was only one bidder, and the cost was 20% more than what it was estimated.
So we're talking about ODOT tonight,
Yep.
but realistically on this particular topic, project labor agreements, this will affect housing.
Absolutely.
This will affect every construction project, period, regardless of whether or not it's in this particular space.
Yeah.
Well, I think it goes to whether or not people generally, whether that's legislators or those in the agencies, are serious about this particular problem with ODOT. If you're serious, you're not going to increase costs by 20%. We already have a problem. If you're serious, you're not going to allow things to continue like clean trucks that raises the cost on everything. So to me, it's both shows how unserious they are and also shows another bit of irony that the majority of our contractors in this state are open shop. So you're actually taking away the opportunity to bid. You're taking away that opportunity for competition, but also those open shops are minority owned, they're women owned. And so you're actually doing the complete opposite of what you always claim to champion, and you're disallowing minority owned and women owned businesses to compete.
They are the ones that have been in my office
It's a travesty.
demanding that this be overturned.
Absolutely.
And again, you're being very polite in the way you're talking about this. I think it just absolutely showcases the corruption that is inherent right now in the majority party. The governor doing this political favor for her friends right before Christmas. We saw it with the passage of Senate Bill 916, a political favor to our union friends who helped get Democrats elected into the supermajority. We're now going to allow them to collect unemployment benefits when they strike. Like, it is a pattern of behavior that I don't think voters should accept. You made the comment, elections have consequences. I'm hoping that people are paying attention. I don't think people sitting at home ready to cast their ballots in November want to continue to elect people that will pay their political allies back. We honored Peter Courtney on the floor today with a wonderful bipartisan remembrance of someone that's been a titan in the building. And the one thing he said that didn't get quoted today, but we've talked about before, is he said, if you can't tell your largest donor to pound sand, you don't belong in this building.
Right.
Let's bring that back to Salem.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex, go to the last slide.
Yeah,
Let's go to ODOT in the news.
Yeah, ODOT in the news. So most folks have probably seen this, but it happened over the last month, right? Correct. Okay.
Yep.
But and this is Travis Brower, who's with ODOT, and he said that we had simply planned for too many projects in the first 2 years, and really more projects than we had the money to pay for it. It means that projects will be delayed, but we are not going to be canceling projects. And when projects get delayed,
They cost more.
they're costing more and more and more.
Yep. So
right?
this is the forecasting error.
Incredible.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, the clearest example of projects being delayed cost more. I was heavily involved in a project, the Columbia River Crossing, back in 2010, 11, 12. That project at that time was about $3 billion. It was stopped by a single state senator in Washington State, and now we're 10 years down the road. And how much is the project now?
I think we're at $7 billion.
$7 billion, and the bridge that $7 billion is less lanes, less capacity than the bridge that we were going to build in 2012. So,
Let's talk about that for 1 second. This particular bridge that he's talking about, the plans for it, 52% of the surface of this bridge, this proposed bridge, is not lanes.
Wow.
It's bike,
Yep.
ped,
There you
and
go.
transit.
and light rail.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which we've covered a little bit tonight,
Yeah.
right?
But over half of this new bridge,
Isn't for cars.
Is a want and not a need.
Well, and
Wild.
the point is that when you delay projects, the costs just continue to go up. So, and it's true no matter what.
Go to the last slide.
Yeah, so here are the other stories. So according to ODOT, from July 2023 to July 2024, the cost for right-of-way camp work for the Bend crew was just under $444,000. So the headline was ODOT crews spent nearly $500,000 on Bend right-of-way homeless camp cleanups last year.
Core function, not core function.
And again, this is something that benefits everybody. It doesn't benefit those that are driving on our roads. general fund dollars ought to be spent on these kinds of things. This is not about keeping roads and bridges operational, especially when you create policies that, that invite homeless folks to Oregon. Let's fix those problems and these other things go away. But we sure as the world shouldn't be using gas tax dollars, weight mile dollars to do cleanups.
And we're talking tens of millions of dollars that we have been spending that's in the governor's recommended budget of $20 million that they're just now putting in as a budget line item in order to litter, graffiti, camp, abandoned property cleanup. This is a societal issue that we're not fixing. Instead, we're just spending more money to clean it up.
Did you see the news when Kotek went out on I-84 to paint over the graffiti, and the next day
it was back.
It was tagged.
Yeah.
So I don't want to add some PTSD on this panel here, but I'm pretty sure there was an ad in the governor's campaign that said it doesn't take a red state takeover to clean up the damn trash, and I'm going to suggest that maybe it does.
Maybe it does.
Maybe it does.
Yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, we're not in this legislature. I'm just doing the housing budget. I know we're not talking about housing, but there are so many issues in this state where we are putting Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids on top of Band-Aids, as opposed to getting to the root problems, so the real problems that are causing so much of this excess spending.
The last story that I'll point to, and I would argue that many viewers probably remember this, but ODOT said that highways may not be safe this past winter or the winter of 2023 due to a budget cut. And we talk about, the importance of where the money's going. If the money's going to sidewalks to nowhere instead of actually plowing roads, I mean, isn't that the core function of the Department of Transportation, making sure that you can drive in the winter and those roads are plowed for not just for leisure, but for a truck going to Safeway to bring in groceries and stuff like that?
No, absolutely. And that one, what I think is kind of crazy, you see when government moves is when the public has a huge outcry. And that particular, this we may not be able to plow roads, that was an outcry that we hadn't seen. And again, we started by talking about this, it disproportionately affects rural Oregon. And so a lot of those routes that they were talking about, I think government camp was a big one, right? For you, Senator. And in those areas, they weren't going to plow it and keep them safe. And the response was a $39 million in emergency funding that was passed in the short session. And they were responsive to that, but it's Band-Aids. Yeah. It's seeing a problem, fixing it by putting a Band-Aid on it. Like it's almost like there's cracks in the dam that you're like trying to stop, and without getting to the reason as to, does this need to be rebuilt? Do we need to start over?
And the challenge, of course, is we have on the House and Senate floors, we have monikers, so we don't accidentally call each other by name in a heated moment. So I represent the Mount Hood region. I mean, you're going to put a pin in Mount Hood and draw a circle around it. You're going to come close to drawing my district map. This really did hit my district hard. People that live in foothills of the mountain were calling saying, are you kidding me? We just got downgraded from B priority to E priority. And we could not get the Area 1 director to answer the phone, return an email. We couldn't get him to attend a local town hall. They were absolutely non-responsive to us. And what they wanted, which is ultimately what they got, in my opinion, is for that public outcry to compel legislators to spur investment in their agency without doing any work as to whether or not there were other funds available, whether or not there were areas of wasteful spending, whether or not there were areas of non-core function that could be set aside to do core function. And they cried loud enough, which is what our federal government does all the time, right? When there's going to be a government shutdown, what happens first? It's
they close the parks.
Let's shut the parks down. Oh, you can't get into Yosemite. All of a sudden, your vacation plans are ruined. You're gonna.
All those folks in the West Hills couldn't go to Meadows to go skiing.
Exactly.
Bummer.
Yeah. But again, for Mount Hood Meadows, constituents of mine,
Of course.
Timberline constituents of mine, they're calling up saying, "Hey, you got to do something about this." Like I am absolutely reliant on that road being clear for people to come spend money.
Right.
Otherwise, we might as well just shut our business down.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so they were responsive to that because of the outcry. I truly believe if there was no outcry, they wouldn't be responsive. We wouldn't have seen the 39 million. But I can't not say that in that 39 million, 4 million of it went to 11 brand new trucks for ODOT. And I pushed back on that like nobody's business. I said, if this is an emergency, then spend the emergency dollars on what is emergency. 11 new trucks is not an emergency. Although I will say there was some foresight there, because if they would have waited till now, they wouldn't have been able to get the trucks because of clean trucks.
That's fascinating. Like, honestly, the way those things come back and touch each other. So what are we going to see? We've got 3 months left in session. What's coming? What's coming our way in the joint transportation? We're going to do an efficiency audit.
Yeah, so we're in the middle of a management review.
A review, not an audit.
No,
A review.
It is a review, and we've the legislature has kind of stood up for itself and said we're going to do this work. We're going to do what legislators are supposed to do and hold the executive branch accountable. So we've hired 2 individuals, really qualified individuals, one from Utah and one from Colorado. They both run big agencies and delivered projects, so they know the right questions to ask. And they were in town this week. They're going to continue to do their due diligence and dig into this agency. And I'm hopeful that they will come back with some recommendations on how this agency can do better as it relates to delivering projects. I happen to have my opinions, but I'm not a highway engineer, and I haven't run a 4,000 person enterprise in my life. But I certainly look at this agency, and there's a number of things that raise my question marks, and so that process is underway. In addition to that, Representative Bossart Davis and I and our Republican staff are digging into this budget. So we've covered some of that tonight. And, we continue to talk about core mission. We continue to talk about priorities. Redirecting existing dollars to roads and bridges is going to be really important. Putting a pause on some of these things that maybe if everything was perfect would make sense. Clearly everything isn't, but we'll continue to push hard. And at the end of the day, we'll see if we have partners in that on the other side of the aisle.
And I think it comes down to, is there a political will or a political appetite for some of this? There is no political appetite. We started this podcast off with saying we're going to take more money from Oregonians. We are not going to just go out and ask for more money to throw money at a problem in order to maybe fix it. I don't prescribe in throwing money at a problem fixes problems. So we'll see what kind of political will is part of this. But you also mentioned in this podcast in 2017, they started that in 2015. And so I know that I personally am on no timeline. It's got to be fixed right. But also we understand that there are needs in ODOT that needs to be considered. So it's going to be interesting the next couple months.
Well, you were in the meeting with the governor and myself when I suggested to the governor that her proposed budget wasn't based in reality. You remember what she said back to me?
I remember at the end of the day, she asked you to be more optimistic.
Yes, she did. Exactly.
And then when you said, I just don't see it in the cards that we're going to get $3 billion in new taxes, and she leaned in, how much can you get me? Well, we'll see where this goes. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time. We're going to continue to knock out, Alex. We're going to go down agency by agency. Hopefully, before the end of session 2, we're going to have you back at least one more time, because this is
an ongoing conversation
and a big topic. Do you happen to know what's next?
It's probably going to be DEQ.
DEQ.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be a hot one.
And then we'll have Boley coming in right after it as well. So
Awesome.
got some good stuff. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned indeed. We'll see you back soon.